The Ferrari 308 may have been introduced back in 1997 at the Frankfurt Auto Show, but the car's stunning wedge shape and overall styling has remained a timeless design that still draws compliments today. Over 12,000 308s were produced throughout the variations, and they have always been and will always be a popular way to enjoy the incomparable Magnum PI carbureted Ferrari experience. The body was designed by Pininfarina and built by Scaglietti, and even 43 years after rolling out of the factory, it remains one of the most beautiful and well-known street model Ferraris built, epitomizing the first of Ferrari's now long line of best-selling two-seater V8 Ferraris. The 308 is the first of what is known as the baby Ferraris. So basically, up until the 308, all Ferrari badged cars had the big V12 engine. And there was the Dino, but that one never actually had Ferrari badging. The only Ferrari symbols the Dino originally had on it were for US models. They had a data plate in the door jamb, but other than that, the actual Ferrari logo did not appear anywhere on the car. And there was some in the engine bay on the data plates, but other than that, there was no, front badge or wheel badges or horn badge, anything like that that you find on other Ferraris today. So the 308 was the first all Ferrari badged under 12-cylinder car. And it's much more nimble than the V12 cars, especially in this era where they didn't have the power steering. It just made it a lot easier to use and just drive around. Now the V12 cars, of course, there's just something about the sound and power that those have. But as a more user-friendly car, the 308 was the perfect option. The 308 also has a transverse mounted engine. So basically, it's not in line with the car, but horizontal to it. And that was done to save space. So it's a mid-mounted engine. And up until this point, now they did it with the Dino too, but basically for a long time, for the history of Ferrari up until the Dino and the 308, they were inline mounted, front engine, 12-cylinder cars. We're talking about street cars. There's different variations with race cars that were produced before that, but for the street cars, that's what they were. And so the transverse mounting created the space necessary in order to put it in the mid-rear of the car, which was necessary for weight balance as well, because you don't want all the weight all the way in the back, and it would just upset the car and make it not a great driver. So that was a very calculated move, and it became a staple for them for a long time. This car is a 1979, meaning it's one of the carbureted versions. And in 1980, they had to go to injected because of EPA and DOT regulations, but the 79 and earlier were carbureted, and there's really nothing like a carbureted car. I mean, I got the old soul where it's the carbureted cars, the feel, the smell, the sound is just something that I will always prefer. And then also, this car does still come with all the smog equipment. So back in the day, people would take off the smog equipment and toss it if they didn't need it. So it's become harder to find, especially on other models like Dinos. Smog equipment's very hard to find. 308s, luckily, because they produce so many, it is easier to find parts for them, but it can still be a little bit of a search sometimes, so it's always nice to already have that all there. As you can see, this car does have aftermarket wheels on it. And 308s I've found usually have some of the most modifications done, or little add-ons. I guess it's not a huge modification because it's easy to revert back to the original wheels. A lot of people would put on aftermarket wheels because at the time, people didn't really 100% grasp the concept of a contact patch. So the wheels originally were a little bit undersized and they drive much better with the slightly larger wheels on them. It's all about how much rubber is touching the ground at any point in time, and you know, in general, the more you can do, the more grip you'll have, the better you can drive. That's a huge oversimplification, but that's just, you know, kind of the concept. So what I've noticed is 308s like this one, it has aftermarket wheels and it has a chrome shift knob. And both those things are very easy to convert back to original, but 308s, people have customized them a lot. As a easy to work on entry-level Ferrari, and with so many of them made, so parts are not super hard to find like other models, it's something people don't mind messing with a little bit and customizing to make it fit their own unique personalities, which I've always loved about the 308s. Plus, they're super easy to work on compared to other cars. So the owner of this car was a retired aviation mechanic, and so when he bought the car, he owned it for about 10 years and did all the work on it himself the whole time. And you don't need to have an engine out service to do the cam belts on this car. It can all be done in the car, making it easier. Plus, because there were so many made and because they have like a cult following, there's lots of forums on Ferrari chat and other sites where you can find answers to basically any question you could have about 308s. They are just, you know, there is such a great community around these cars that if you're mechanically inclined, you'll have no problem working on it yourself. And if you don't want to, then there's no lack of service centers that can handle it. If you want to send it to an authorized Ferrari service center, you can, but there's really no point because, I mean, honestly, they cost a little bit more money and will do the same job that a non-authorized center can do. But, you know, if you want to, then more than happy to, you know, send it there, then that's fine. I know that some people get a little nervous about carbureted cars, and I've had lots of people tell me they'd rather have, especially in California, mostly in California, they'd rather have a QV than a carbureted 308 because it's easier to pass smog. And honestly, with the 308s, that's not entirely true. They're not impossible to pass smog. I have had carbureted 308s pass smog before. It takes a little tuning of the carbs. And that's another thing that scares people, is not a lot of mechanics know how to work on carburetors anymore. And of course, especially when you get into Ferraris and these older Ferraris, there's the specialty shops where they do know what they're doing. But you have to find the right guy. And once you find that guy that can tune the carbs on your car, because you know, carbs, you tune them differently for different elevations and stuff like that. So it's not kind of universal, you know. It's like you can't tune it for California and it's going to function properly in Colorado. In Colorado, because of the elevation, they're usually tuned a little more rich. And so when I've gotten cars from Colorado, we have to tune them and lean them out a bit because they just run a little too rich. But it's not the most complicated thing in the world. You just have to find somebody who knows what they're doing. And I personally absolutely love carbureted cars of pretty much any kind because I think they just sound the best. I mean, the early carbureted 308s are the best sounding of all the 308s. They have comparable power to the QV, but you get that sound that you just don't get from an injected car. And that's why if I were to pick a 308 out of the whole series, even out of the 328, which is a great car in itself, but I love the early carbureted 308s. I think they are the best. This car is running a little bit rich. I'm gonna see if my husband can tune it. He's been working on carburetors his whole life, so I got very lucky that I have somebody right here who can take care of it for me. But, you know, other than that, I mean, this car shifts smooth. Even second gear, which I've mentioned before, can be an issue in these cars. And in this car, second gear is not an issue. So You know, this is a great example. And because it's been modified, you know, nothing crazy, but different wheels and headlights, it's gonna be a little cheaper than, say, a completely factory original kind of like preservation award style one. So I think it's just the best option for just a great driver if you want that, you know, gated shift Ferrari driving experience. This 308 has just over 68,000 miles. And what I find interesting is with 308s, it's very common to find them in the 50 to 80,000 mile range, whereas on some of the older cars, it's more common to find them in like the 30 to 50. That's, you know, and you'll find some, of course, with higher miles, but these usually get a bit more mileage on them. And the reason is because they're just so easy to drive. You know, a lot of times with the older cars, they're a bit more finicky, and especially with the front engine V12s, they're heavier. So you really kind of have to work, you know, you have to plan for the drive. You have to be prepared basically. Whereas the 308 is more of a just getting it and cruise and not worry about it kind of car. As long as it's well maintained and all that, just like with any Ferrari, it can have its own little quirks and personality traits, but in general, it's known as a more reliable car. It's the last of, or one of the last of the all analog Ferraris. So you don't have the complicated computer systems you get in other cars. Basically with some of the newer ones, 612s, 599s, they not super common, but one of the things that does go wrong is the dash will go out. I've seen that happen a few times, and it's not cheap to repair, not impossible, but you know, so the electronics in some of the newer models can cause some electronic gremlins that you just don't get in these 308s, which is pretty awesome. And because they're lighter, they're nimble, easy to work on, easy to find parts, people have just driven them more. Which is awesome because personally, like, you know, you buy a car, do whatever you want with it. If you want to have it low miles, sit in your garage, great. But I personally love driving, especially when you get the gated shifter, you know? So if you're in a manual gated shift Ferrari, I couldn't imagine having as much fun looking at it in my garage as I would have driving it. I have sold countless 308s in my career, and God, in 50 years, I can only imagine how many my dad's dealt with. But, you know, when we get a new one in, I still never get tired of driving them, and it never ceases to put a smile on my face. It's just, there's something about the ease of driving them and just how they handle that just, you know, it makes me happy, and it makes me just enjoy driving it that much more. And I have dealt with a bunch of 308s, pretty much every variation of the car, from the Vetro Racinas, which were the fiberglass models, to GTBs, GTS, carbed, injected, QV. So if you have any questions about any of the other models or want to know a little bit more about 308s, I have lots of videos that give you lots more information on the car, from what to look for when buying to what it takes to service them. So if you're interested, make sure to check out those videos. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and stay tuned because we got a lot more content coming very soon.